If from the perspective of a forward, I asked who was the hardest player to go up against in the late 2000s, who would you pick? Nesta, Materazzi, Vidic, Terry, Vieira? Well, surely it's got to be a beast of a man, but what if I told you that it was a 5'8" skinny guy from South Korea? Ji-sung Park was out of this world. He was easily one of the most hardworking players in history. His ego was virtually non-existent, and he had the stamina of a horse. It could be the last game of the season, going into extra time, and he would still be hounding his player, sprint after sprint. He never got tired. Anyone who watched him had the feeling that he simply couldn't be human. The fans joked that he had 3 lungs. Pirlo said that he moved at the speed of an electron and called him the first nuclear-powered footballer. Sir Alex even claimed that out of all the players he coached, Park was the only one he believed was truly capable of stopping Lionel Messi. And you know, if you're capable of stopping an alien like Messi, you gotta be as superhuman as him. But you know what's really shocking? At 18, he was literally told to give up on football. In Korea, there's a draft kind of like in the NBA, and not a single club in the entire country picked him. Even though he had repeatedly led his high school team to success after success, they all saw him as a joke just because of his size, and he ended up just joining university to get a degree in economics. But then Park decided to take matters into his own hands, and what happened next was just straight out of a fantasy movie. You see, his dad was a butcher, and so the two began conjuring up ways to force Park's body to grow bigger and taller. It started with a meat-only diet, but then, well, let me quote Park himself. Some of the things my dad would give me tasted horrible. Some of it smelled deadly, undrinkable. At times, I didn't know what it was, but I know I ate frogs, antlers, even deer's blood. If he said it was good for my body, I would eat it. Sometimes I'd throw up, but I kept eating. My desire to play football was bigger than my distaste for the food. I'm not even going to lie to you. The first time I read this, I thought it was fake news. But then I found actual interviews of him talking about it on Korean websites, and well, I don't even know what to say, but supposedly Park claims he grew an extra 7 centimeters over that period, and that's no joke. Regardless, what was the point of all of this if no club had picked him in the draft? Well, Park got really lucky. The Olympic Games were coming up, and under 23s needing to get some practice, a friendly match was set up precisely between them and Park's university team. And in one of the most unbelievable turns of events I've ever seen, the national team coach was so impressed that not only did he call him up for the Olympics, but after they were knocked out despite winning 2 out of their 3 group stage games, he called him up for the actual Asian Cup qualifiers. Park debuted for the actual national team before he even signed his first professional contract. As you might imagine after this, he had no problem finding a team. He even got interest from across the sea, becoming one of the first Koreans to play in Japan, joining the legendary Kazu Miura at Kyoto Sanga. But really, it wasn't all good news. Not only did Kyoto Sanga get relegated in his first season there, but the manager that had called him up for the national team got sacked, and suddenly it seemed like his 15 minutes of fame were over. But really, that sacking was a blessing in disguise, because the manager that took over was Gus Hiddink, and with Park knowing not only that he had to impress him and, with his statement 2 years before, made sure to give an interview publicly apologizing for his actions. Though I'm sure Park was well over it by then, as not only did he get nominated for UEFA Forward of the Year alongside Ronaldinho, Shevchenko, Eto'o, and Adriano, despite the fact he wasn't even really a forward, but well, back in the match against Lyon, a Man United scout was on the stands to watch Essien, but in his own words, I could not focus on the player at hand because my attention kept being pulled towards this never-ending bundle of energy buzzing across the pitch like a cocker spaniel. And so, once the season was over, his agent went up to him and told him Sir Alex was waiting on the phone. At first, he didn't believe him. I mean, only one East Asian player had ever been at United. But then he picked up the phone, heard the Scottish accent, and knew it was real. Hiddink tried to convince Park to stay at the club, promising him a move to Chelsea, but Park had made up his mind, and a month later he had signed for United for only 7 million euros. It was one of the greatest bargains in the history of the sport. Regardless, at the time, as per usual, all pundits made sure to disregard the move as only a marketing stunt. But his new teammates, well, they quickly realized Park wasn't just being signed to sell some shirts in Korea. As Scholes said, Park was the toughest player I ever faced. Just unbelievable. I would dread the thought of going to training. It was a nightmare. He would come to me, stare me in the face, and tell me, "You won't even get a shot off today." And he was right every time. Before you knew it, the media's perception had changed. Now in a more defensive role, everyone was mind-blown by his tirelessness and determination. He was no longer Ji-sung Park. He was Three-lung Park, because according to the fans, with stamina like that, he surely had to have an extra lung. In fact, at United, the admiration for this man was such that only 3 months into his time there, he was handed the captain's armband for the first time. It was unbelievable. But unfortunately, no matter how well that first season went, the following season the injuries began haunting him once more, and by March he was forced into the sidelines. Surgery was required once again, and Park would only make it back to the pitch 9 months later. At first, most feared a second surgery would have completely wrecked his knee, that at most it would be a long time before he was back to his best. But once United made it to the Champions League quarterfinals, Sir Alex just knew he couldn't do it without Park, so he got called up, and man, it was unbelievable. After going through so much, he still excelled in both legs against Roma, and once Barcelona came in their way, no matter what they threw at him, no matter if it was Messi, Eto'o, Xavi, or Deco, Ji-sung Park was arguably the man of the match both home and away. He was maybe the biggest reason why United had managed to make it to the final, which is why it hurt 10 times more when Sir Alex Ferguson left him not on the bench, but completely out of the team sheet, watching from the stands as United became champions of Europe. Once asked about, Park, as always, kept his composure, saying only, "The team won, so I'm happy. It's frustrating not to play, but there will be other opportunities." Honestly, I doubt he ever even confronted Sir Alex about his choice to leave him out, but there was no need. Once he wrote his autobiography, it was there for everyone to see. The one thing about the 2008 final that I regret to this day was leaving Park completely out of the squad after he had played such a great role in getting us there. But in reality, Park was right. There would be other opportunities. In fact, just a year later, he was getting his chance. After an incredible performance in the semifinals against Arsenal that saw him not only opening the scoring, but being involved in what many call the greatest counterattack of all time. He was on the starting 11 for the final against Barcelona, but unfortunately, that time around it was simply not meant to be. United lost, and we can only hope the 4 trophies he won that season were enough to ease Park's pain. Regardless, despite the fact that next season Park struggled for game time, he would still be the first name on the list for every big game. Sir Alex was still well aware of how important he could be against the best of the best. And once they met AC Milan, Park played maybe the greatest game of his career. Fergie doesn't often fear players enough to assign them a bodyguard. But that day, it was different. Pirlo was at the peak of his powers, and before the match, Fergie looked at Park and told him, "Your job today is Pirlo. That's all. Pirlo." As Rooney said, back then Pirlo was averaging 110 passes per game. 60 to 70 of them were forward passes. The type that can really hurt you. So Fergie told him, he cannot be allowed that pass. You cannot be 1 yard or 1 second late. I think Pirlo might have made 40 passes at most that game, and 95% of them were backwards. Park won the duel. And you know what's funny? Even Rooney underestimated just how great Park was that night. Pirlo didn't even get close to 40 passes. Not only did Park force him to settle for a mere 21, he even made sure to score one of the goals. Pirlo was so impressed with him that day that even years later he made sure to mention it in his autobiography, saying, "They unleashed Park to shadow me. They programmed him to stop me." His devotion to the task was almost touching. Even though he was a famous player, he had no issue consenting to be used as a guard dog. As Ferdinand would say, I'm sure Pirlo expected to wake up the next day and see Park in his bed beside him. Still, despite the fact that at that point Park was only 29, the end was near the next season. The injuries hit for a third time. Park struggled all year, but worked as hard as he could for one final chance at a Champions League final. 2 assists in the group stage helped them make it through. After missing the last 16 through injury, he even scored against Chelsea to put United in the semis, and once they beat Ralf Rangnick's Schalke, Park was in the final once more. But unfortunately, Barcelona would once again be there waiting to snatch any silverware in reach. Years later, however, when asked about the final, Sir Alex would say, Ji-sung Park. That's where I lost that final at Wembley. At halftime, I should have put Park man marking Messi. That was a mistake. We had just equalized going into halftime. We were playing well. I got overconfident. But if I had put Park on Messi, I think we would have beat them. I really do. But unfortunately for both of them, that time around it would really be the last opportunity. The next season, Park really struggled with injuries once more. United went trophyless, iconically losing the league title to City in the last match of the season, and Park would never play for them again. The next season, he joined QPR and was made captain straight away. Still, none of that stopped them from having a horrible season with only 4 wins, leading them to loan Park away to PSV following their relegation, where 1 year later, at 33 years of age, he announced his retirement, citing constant pain from his knee injuries as the reason. And that day, the world of football stood up for this tiny South Korean who had made it to 3 Champions League finals, won 19 trophies, and even managed a 4th-place finish at a World Cup. He was undoubtedly the most successful East Asian player of all time. Subscribe for more.